I am back with another PlayStation 4 controller tutorial. This time, the Decepticons.
Decepticons, transform and rise up!
Thank you so much for watching. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you where you can get your own PS4 custom home buttons, as well as a PS4 custom light bar for the back of your controller. All kinds of good stuff. Some very basic information in this, as well as some information that I have not included in my other tutorials. So, without further ado, let's get started. For this project, I chose to use Duplicolor paint. I choose to use Duplicolor because it is a fantastic paint. It's a little more expensive, but it definitely looks fantastic. I used gray metallic paint, as well as an acrylic lacquer clear coat and sandable primer. You're going to need to get yourself a Phillips head screwdriver, as well as a small flathead screwdriver, and whatever color buttons you would like to use. You can find those on eBay, or you can paint your own buttons. And you can also find yourself a custom home button and custom light bar on eBay. I use Buffy the Slayer mods. A link to their eBay store will be provided for you in the description below. You can see they have lots of options. And sometimes it's hit or miss with them. Sometimes they have some PS4 buttons in stock on eBay, sometimes they don't. There are other options for you. They also have custom buttons for you, like your ABXY or your circle, square, triangle, and X buttons for your PlayStation 4. You can get several different options. I think this is kind of a newer thing that they're doing, so they might be a little limited on that at this time. However, maybe in the future they will have more options available for those kinds of things. Now, for the custom light bars, I choose to use Gorilla Controller's custom light bars. These are custom full-color printed light bars. They are not a vinyl decal or anything like that, and there are lots of options here as well, ranging from about $20. So to disassemble our controller, it is quite easy to do. You'll use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the 4 screws that are in the back, not before removing the sticker, the Sony label, the manufacturer's label, which is on the back. They're actually pretty easy to pull off, especially off of brand new controllers. You just pry off on what edge and then pull it towards you, and they will come off with, most of the time, no residue left behind. Once I have removed this, I always tend to put them on the PlayStation 4 controller packaging, on that hard plastic, so that way I can remove it later really easily and put it back onto our final project. Now, to open the controller, I use a small flathead screwdriver to wedge in from the top, pulling apart to where there's just enough space that I can put it in around the sides and work my way around the controller, slowly and carefully freeing the plastic from itself. While you're doing this, keep in mind that there is a ribbon cable that connects the front side of the controller to the back side of the controller, so be careful when you're pulling this apart. Here is our ribbon cable inside next to our battery, and notice that the blue side of the ribbon cable faces away from the battery. Make a mental note of that for when we reassemble later. We can remove the battery of the controller very easily by grabbing hold of it right at the port and pulling up and away. We will next use our Phillips head screwdriver to remove the screw that is located right in this area here underneath of the plate that holds the battery into position, and then we will remove that plate. Now, you can remove the plate before you do that if you would like to, as in you could pull it off before you unscrew that, but I chose to do it this way. It's up to you how you want to do that. To remove that, you have to grab it from the sides and then pull it away from the controller, and then it will release. It is kind of tricky, but just keep working at it. If it's giving you a little trouble, it will come off. Again, grab a hold of it from the sides and pull it away from the PCB board of the controller. In this area, we're going to find another ribbon cable that connects our touchpad to the back of the controller. You're going to take a small screwdriver and pulling upward very carefully and delicately, you will release that from the port that it is secured to. We can then remove the innards of our controller and remove the thumbsticks from that part of the controller. There are also triggers on this that you can grab a hold of and pull upward. That is how they come off. It's just kind of pushed down into place. There's like a little track that they kind of slide onto. They come off very easily. Just pull them away. Now we are done with this piece. You can set this off to the side. We're going to go ahead and remove the buttons and the touchpad from the front of our controller. You can see that the touchpad swings inwards and then out and away. Pull away the padding for the buttons and then just flip your controller over. The buttons will fall out. There is another padding that is underneath of the home button. Be sure to remove that as well. We're going to move on to the bottom part of the controller now. We're going to remove the light bar from here. Now there's this white piece here that fits over the top. You can just pop it right out. And then underneath of that is a clear piece of basically like a light dispersing plexi. We will lift that away from the controller, and at the same time pulling outward, it will come out. It may give you a little resistance at first. This one seems to be giving me a little trouble, but you just keep working at it and eventually it will come off. Now to remove this little PCB board here, we're going to use a Phillips head screwdriver and remove the single screw that holds it into place. After I have the screw removed from the outside of the controller, I will push in on the USB port and kind of push it upward, and that will usually loosen it from the peg that helps secure it into place as well. Now sometimes the trigger buttons will stay inside the trigger holes. You will just remove those by working at them, kind of pushing in from the outside and upward, loosening the pegs from their little grooves that they set into. Our touchpad has a white piece of plastic that is meant to depress the button inside. To remove this, you're going to grab a hold of the white tabs and pull them towards the center of the touchpad while simultaneously lifting upward on the tab that I just showed you. It is now time to sand our controller, which will take you about 20 to 30 minutes to do. You're going to use 400 grit sandpaper and basically take this from a glossy finish to a matte finish. It does not take very long, and it is an important step. It helps the paint stick to your project, and basically just, you don't want to skip this step. I have a lot of people asking me if they can skip this step, and in every single tutorial lately I've been kind of touching on that, because it's one of those things that if I don't put it in, people will ask, "Oh, you didn't say that on this, so should I skip this?" No, goddammit. Never skip a step that I show you. If it's a step that you can skip, then I wouldn't show it to you in the tutorial. So, for God's sakes, don't ask me if you can skip sanding, or I will wring your neck until you are blue and dead. Do you hear me? Jesus Christ. Alright, so I'm going to let the audio play in this so you can hear exactly what the spray sounds like as it's being applied. That will help you gauge better how to go about doing this. Our first coat here is going to be our primer coat, and we're just going to very lightly dust over all of the stuff that we're painting. The buttons, the triggers, the back of the controller, and the front of the controller. If you want to paint your touchpad, you can also paint your touchpad. It will work when you're done. That is an option for you. If you didn't want to buy new buttons, or if it's just not in your budget, you can paint all of the parts of the controller and they will work just fine. Before we go to paint, we're going to want to make sure that our paint is nice and warm. You can achieve this by putting it in a hot cup of water until the whole paint can feels nice and warm. You shake the paint and it does not cool down. It maintains its temperature. This is perfect for keeping the paint nice and even as you spray it across your project. And again, our first coat, just like the first and only coat of primer, you will lightly dust it on, and that's all the paint that you're going to need for your first coat. I'm elevating my project upwards so that way I can get underneath of these grips here. I can get all around the whole controller, making sure to get paint applied to every single bit. Any little nook and cranny, any little curves, anything that's facing kind of downward, like those parts of the controller, those can be kind of tricky. Lift your controller upward, have it elevated while you're painting. Our second coat is going to go on a little heavier than our first coat, not much. You want this coat to look barely wet, to where it just barely shines. You don't want a high luster. We'll save that for our third coat. For our third and final coat, we want to actually make this guy kind of shine. So we're going to apply enough paint to where it just starts to luster, like actually has a nice glossy look to it. Once you have achieved that, you need to stop painting on it. Look around on it, make sure that it looks like that all over the project. You don't want it to look shiny on the bottom part and then up towards where the light bar is, it's still kind of dull. You don't want that. You want to make sure that you have a nice, even, shiny coat of paint across the entire project. Now, how long should you be waiting between coats? I say you give it 15 minutes between each coat. So you lay your first coat down, you give it 15 minutes. Then you lay your second coat down, you give it 15 minutes. Then you lay your third coat down. Then we're going to wait about a half an hour to 45 minutes and let that kind of dry up a little bit. And then we're going to hit it with our clear coat. Now while those pieces are drying, I'm going to go ahead and hit these buttons. I'm going to hit them with a purple, a nice shade of purple. This is actually a Rust-Oleum color that I'm using here, and because I'm using Rust-Oleum, I'm actually using Rust-Oleum American Accents paint, which is a little thicker. Because of that, I'm only going to throw down 2 coats of paint. That's all you really need when you're using this specific product. Again, Rust-Oleum American Accents paint, it's a bit thicker. You will only use 2 coats of this. The first coat is going to go on just like the first coat would. Very, very brief, very quick, all over the top of it. And then our second coat, which will actually be thick enough that we do not need a third coat for this. Now after you've waited about half an hour to 45 minutes, we're going to hit this with some clear coat. Again, making sure to have warmed up our clear coat just the same as we did with our paint. Our first coat is going to go on very, very quickly. It's just a light dusting. This helps avoid any kind of funky reaction that you might have. Again, I'm actually using Duplicolor clear coat over the Rust-Oleum paint. I do not recommend that somebody who's a beginner or intermediate skill set do that. Okay, I'm doing it because I know that if I lay down a thin coat over the top of it, that it's going to create a barrier, and it's going to help me determine whether or not I'm going to get a funky reaction. I still suggest that whatever paint you get a matching clear coat, so that way you don't risk that problem at all. And just as before, we're going to allow 15 minutes in between each coat. Our first coat, again, going to be very light. Our second coat is going to be looking to where it's just barely wet. There's somewhat of a reflection, but it is not a high gloss reflection. Our third coat will be laid down to where you actually have that high gloss reflection. You want to do it very easily, lightly spraying across the whole project, turning the project, and then spraying it again. You don't want to put too much down, and the faster you go with this, the less likely you are to put too much paint down. And it is important for me to mention, as I do in all of my tutorials, no, you cannot skip the clear coat. Clear coat is there to protect all of that work that you have done. If you skip the clear coat, your paint will scratch, it will flake, it will fall off, it will stick to your hands because you have oils in your hands, and those oils and that paint do not mix. Not at all. Clear coat stops all that from happening. It's meant to resist these kinds of imperfections that could develop over time. So as you would not skip the sanding, I mean, I know you would if you could, but you can't, and since you know that you can't do that, you're not going to skip that. You're also not going to skip the clear coat. It's extremely important. So a recap, how important is clear coating and sanding? Extremely important. You guessed it. You get an A+. Way to go. In this tutorial, I felt it would be best to give you guys a very basic painting tutorial. The one thing that I will show you that is different in this than any of the other tutorials that I've done on the PS4 controller is I'm actually going to show you how to very carefully remove the touchpad board from the inside of the touchpad and put it onto one of these replacement touchpads. The thing about it is they're built differently, and we'll discuss that once we get into reassembly. So as I mentioned in the previous section, we're going to remove the PCB board from this part of the touchpad. Now I used my Dremel to wear away. There's a tiny little lip that kind of cradles this thing into place. I'm basically just whittling that away until I can get to a point where I can fit an X-Acto knife underneath of that PCB board. Now all that dust is basically just from the table that I'm sanding on. Now to loosen that touchpad inside, I used a heat gun. We set it up on high heat and then continuously moving over the top of it until it was nice and warm, and I could fit my X-Acto knife underneath it there very easily. It actually went in just as easily as you saw it there. And then we'll try to pry it upwards and backwards, and eventually it will come free. Now we can take this and directly put it onto our brand new store-bought purple touchpad. Now these are built a little bit differently, and they don't have the track that the one that we removed it from does. There's a track in there that holds that white piece of plastic into place and puts it right where it needs to be. So whenever we're reapplying the, we're going to use some hot glue to put that white piece of plastic back into place. But when we do that, we're going to want to make sure that it is going to depress the button inside. So it may be best for you to put the touchpad back into place, like into the hole of the controller here, and, you know, like where it goes, and then put your white piece of plastic down based on where it fits in there. This way you avoid, you know, not putting it in there and aligning it correctly to where it actually depresses the button inside. And when we're putting back in our X, circle, square, and triangle buttons, if you kind of like lose as to where those are supposed to go, the back of the box will show you, and you can also look up on Google, you know, and just basically map it out from that. And this is our custom home button that we got from Buffy the Slayer Mods. Great product. I really appreciate Buffy the Slayer Mods, and I highly recommend that you check them out for when you're doing any of your controllers. An Xbox One, PlayStation 4, they even have stuff for the PlayStation 3. Phenomenal group of guys, and a great price. Basically, we were just reassembling this in reverse order from the way that we disassembled it. Putting our buttons down, then putting our button pads down, then putting the touchpad back into place, then our motherboard, and putting our screws back in. Guys, this is seriously not that difficult. It's one of the reasons why I went ahead and put it into a speed run the whole time. If you want to see other controller tutorials that I have done that show you maybe a little bit more detail, maybe you think that I'm skipping over some stuff, I can guarantee you that the other 2 PlayStation 4 controller tutorials that I've done definitely all combined have all kinds of great information for you, and you will have an answer to whatever question that you have. Also, feel free to read the comments. I often reply to comments and questions. I've also done Q&As on case mods and controller mods and stuff like that, so be sure to check out my channel for any of the information that you would like that maybe you feel I didn't give you here, or again I might have breezed over. It's available on my channel. Absolutely. And if there is something that you're finding that, or that you can't find rather, and you do want to know something about, I don't know, some sort of painting technique or some sort of modding technique that I have yet to cover in a tutorial, feel free to let me know, because if it's a great idea, I will more than likely make a video out of it and of course give you credit and say hello. I love doing that kind of thing. That was actually how this whole Decepticons PlayStation 4 project even happened. A subscriber of mine showed me a little project that he was working on. I liked it so much that I decided that I wanted to replicate it, and along with doing the console, I had to do a controller to match this thing. And that's why we're here right now. That's why you're here watching this, because here is our Decepticons PlayStation 4 controller getting put back together. This is where we put in all of our pieces and on the bottom, again in reverse order, and you can see there next to the glue gun there, I've got my custom printed Decepticons logo light bar. It pops into place just as well as the factory one does. And now it's time to recall that precious memory from the beginning of the video where I told you, hey, remember that the blue side of the ribbon cable faces away from the battery. When you are reassembling this thing, and it comes time for you to put that ribbon cable back into place, remember the blue side of the ribbon cable faces away from the battery. Now when you put this back into place, you can always hit your home button and make sure that it is actually turning on. And as you can see, for some reason I haven't put the battery back into place here yet, but I will put the battery back into place. So yeah, there you can see that the blue side, once I put that in, that's when it started lighting up, and we can actually start closing this thing back together. The bottoms down around the grips, there are like these 2 little posts. They kind of like to get in the way. You might have to kind of push them inward a little bit as you are trying to hinge this thing back together. You will hinge it back together from the trigger side and then down towards the grips, and just keep pushing it together until it all snaps into place. Check all your buttons. Make sure that this thing is fully functionable and you are ready to get back to playing games. Guys, very basic tutorial this time, not really a whole lot of information, but good information. I hope that you found something useful out of this, especially the transfer of the old touchpad into the new touchpads. That was something that I was really iffy about, because, you know, the first one I did, it's kind of tough to get inside there, but I realized that heating up those touchpads really makes removing that PCB board a lot easier. Thanks again so much, everybody, for watching. I love all of you so very much. I can't believe that we're at 6,000 subscribers now and on the road to 10,000, and I'd love you to join me in that journey to 10,000 subscribers. Click subscribe, check out my channel, look for other do-it-yourself tutorials, video game footage, all kinds of really cool stuff, unboxings. I do it all. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.